Are you Hudson?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Would you like me to time?
I'm okay with that. Okay, hi everybody. Can you please quickly get a round of introductions, name, speaking order? Oji?
Yeah, Ashish, he, they going first. And then followed by Tejas, I think.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll speak first and you're
Rahul here, speaking second.
CG?
Me first. Second, no preference.
Okay. Seal?
First is Ambika, she, her.
Second is Sam, Fabian.
Thank you very much. Anam, she, her, good luck.
Emily, she, her. Also good luck.
Hudson.
Okay, great. Yeah, without any further ado, can we have the piano?
Yes, judges, you hear us correct. We are arguing that the past 2,000 years of human endeavor have been a waste of time. For all our ruthless competition, for all of our straining towards wealth, power, and status, for all of our technical marvels and the obscene excesses of production which modern society is capable of, we have not managed to escape the veil of tears called modern life. This proposition team is proud to associate itself with Marx, the Buddha, and Schopenhauer in leading at least this one human life out of the valley of the shadow of capitalism and into the light. Welcome to North Sentinel Island. 3 points. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why it is that having even basic necessities guaranteed qua info slide actually puts you in quite a good position. It's not the sexy argument, but we will get there. Secondly, false consciousness and consumerism. Thirdly, exploitation. All of these explicitly comparative. Firstly, therefore, why is it that just because we know that you have a stable life in a small society, probably where you undergo subsistence farming, subsistence fishing, probably where your social roles are static, means that in many ways, the guarantees which you get in the info slide are incredibly important. Number one, just having food, right? Guaranteed. And more importantly, never having to worry that your food supply will be interrupted automatically puts you above approximately 1.5 to 2 billion living humans today who have to think about that on a regular basis. Similarly, the bottom billion, whose lives will be devastated by climate change and from whose ravages you will be exempt. We also think, by the way, this is a fairly stable society. Note that the Indian government has passed an ordinance banning everyone from coming within 3 miles of North Sentinel Island. I'd like to point out when John Allen Chow went there, he got killed, so this is not something people are likely to do. So that already is a really high guarantee of baseline psychological security. But why is it compared to the modern world, capitalism, why is it that this is significantly better? The first reason is, under the point of false consciousness and materialism, is that modern society is competitive and brutal in a way which these societies are not. Once you move beyond a merely subsistence society, once you aim for a beyond subsistence level of living, society has an incentive to structure human relations so that everyone is competing to be as maximally productive as possible. What does that mean? It means people who work incredibly hard, even when pay is incredibly low. No, thank you. It means things like parents insisting that children have to study hard to outdo their competitors in school so that they will have the best possible jobs. It means a society comprised of rivalrous relations, because given that the number of top positions in a very large society are small relative to the number of people in that society, society becomes incredibly competitive. I'll take you in a moment, opening. Why is life on this island different? Well, it's because your society is much smaller. You don't relate to people in the same way as productive units. It's much more likely, for instance, that you care about people around you because you grew up with them, or because you might rely on them in a time of difficulty to help you out. Competition, therefore, becomes much less important, and all the suffering and psychological torment which comes with it. Yeah.
This seems rather hand-wavy. You know what else is a secluded society? North Korea, where there's a police state to make sure no one can enter or leave your island.
Yeah,
why does your world look like you said?
Yeah, North Sentinel Island is much too small to have a police state, and they don't even have modern technology which you need to do a police state. Like trust and communal relations are the way in which these societies run. Secondly, we also think that you do not need to be sold false narratives like by working hard you will become rich, right? Like that's the touchstone of one society. It's a lie we tell people so that they can be more productive. This tends to be not true because the people who are richer than you have all kinds of social relations which help them when you get into the workplace. If you're born into poverty, even if you work very hard, you might not be able to overcome the numerous structural barriers. You might not be able to overcome the richest the access of the rich to the media and to the levers of power. But you are told that, and therefore your striving often comes to naught. So the first observation I have is that you were just exempt to a large, but maybe not total extent, from all of these competitive pressures. But now let's come on to materialism and why that makes things worse. Yeah.
If it is the case that we want to escape lack and all those social desires, why not choose Buddhism, which has been maximized in this way and optimized in this way for enlightenment?
It's really hard to be a Buddhist when people around you aren't Buddhist, when they're busy engaging in a materialist cycle of, just caring about stuff, which we don't think is great. So, consumerism. Modern society is consumerist and materialist for the simple reason is that in order for capitalism to work, people have to consume. In other words, people cannot be allowed under any circumstances to be happy with what they have in life, because the moment you're happy with what you have in life, you are no longer a valuable consuming unit, and the multiplier on which the capitalist society runs dies. Why is materialism incredibly problematic? Number one, because we think desire, at least in the form materialism promotes, is suffering. Because for you to want something more in life, for you to feel that this phone is not the best, I need a better jacket, I need a nicer house, maybe to get a partner, or maybe just because it's what I want, makes you unhappy because you're perpetually told that in order for you to be valuable, you must be unhappy. Secondly, it also means you neglect those people around you. On their deathbed, people who suddenly have the clarity of mind to realize that all the things they strive for were meaningless. They should have spent more time with their friends, with their family, with their children. All these sacrifices which people make to accumulate material wealth are features of capitalist society we don't think will exist on this island. Why does it not exist on this island? Number one, the instruments through which consumerism perpetuates itself simply do not exist. Modern consumerism, or indeed the modern supply chain. We also think many small societies don't even have the same conception of exclusive property rights as we do. When you do not have an excess of material wealth, people are forced to share. I can't say that I want to have the best backhoe in this particular community, because at some point you will need it to. So it also becomes your particular backhoe, right? So the way in which we relate to each other becomes radically different. Second point, therefore, the second fun point, therefore, exploitation. Why you're exempt from that? Now, we think modern capitalist society is highly exploitative. Why? Well, because the people who run the companies you are a part of, and you are most likely to be the worker, because they're the most numerous, are extremely far apart, right? The average boss is so many layers separated from the worker that the relation is purely one of producer and exploiter. In a small society, that's not the case. A person might be your relative, or someone you grew up with, or have otherwise communal relations with. That is why in these societies you don't have the obscene inequalities of capitalist societies, where CEO pays have grown from being on average 20 times the worker to 400 times the worker over the last 50 years. We also think you're much less alienated from the work itself. In a hyper-specialized modern society, right, where there's lots of specialization in jobs people do, you're often doing something like sending an email as part of some much bigger process, or like a widget maker on the factory line. You don't see yourself in the products you produce, which is why it's so famously mind-numbing to work in a cubicle. Now, on this island, you will have to work hard. It's not all great. But when I make a boat which works, when I cook food well, when I carve something which the community uses, I see myself and my value in that object in a way in which the modern capitalist worker, who is supposed to be one microscopic part of a vast and Manichaean and inhuman production chain, simply cannot be. It's nice. We suggest you join us sometime.
I thank the speaker for that final speech. I invite the leader of
tell you in this speech. First, this island is not that great. Second, capitalism is not that bad. I do like your shirt though. Okay, what are you going to get on side government? Basic food security. You're not going to die by a climate disaster. This is pretty nice, right? But it's also important to note that you are secluded on this island. You have no option but to live within an isolated society and according to whatever normative structures it has developed. To be clear, you're not going to leave this island. I think that side government agrees with us pretty clearly, but it's pretty important to think about why. Firstly, we think there are cultural norms that dictate that you're very anti-outsiders. The outside world is painted as threatening and dangerous. This is a belief belief that is widely held by the people in this society. Secondly, there are language barriers. You've developed your own isolated language. Thirdly, there are resource barriers. You're like totally isolated. You do not trade. You aren't resource rich. You don't have access to wealth and the mobility that comes with it. Fourthly, there are like legal barriers, right? Like laws that actually prevent people from coming in, people from coming out. All of that stuff I think is pretty straightforward, but it's also pretty important. I'm gonna give you like one mini argument on basic living standards and why we think we're at least competitive if we don't beat side government in the first place. Because they try to say, look, we think we put people in like a much better position than a good amount of the population in the status quo just by having them born on this island. I don't think that's true. Food is a basic need. Other basic needs include, like access to modern medicine, shelter, things that dictate quality of life, things that say that you can sleep in a safe, warm place and like live a long life. And if you happen to get a disease, you don't die of your disease because you can go to a hospital and be like, hey, I have a disease, can you cure me? And they will. We're on this island, it's like not the case that that's going to happen. So their lives are shorter, they're less comfortable, they're generally worse in terms of quality. Even if you do have access to food, we think that in our absolute worst case, a person may be born into the same kind of resource deprivation that is endemic to side government. At our best case, obviously, you get a lot more resources, and in the general case, we think that we have people who have access to food, even if they have to work for it, but they also have access to more of the amenities provided by modern society. Why are those amenities worth trading off with like the deep evils of capitalism? I'm going to give you a second argument on the importance of agency, but before that, closing.
Why do people want to live?
I think about this a lot, but I think like generally we have a lot of survival instincts. It's pretty cool to get to know people. It's pretty cool to have like people in your life that you love. It's pretty cool to have all of those things. Another really powerful part of why people want to live is hope, and I think that that's something we are only able to access. I'm going to explain that in this argument, which is basically my defense of capitalism. Subsistence-based living is like not great. It's very labor intensive. Every single day you spend your life just like using your body to its fullest capacity to produce the goods that you need to survive. You never get a break. This is like the worst kind of exploitative job, right? This is what you have to do every single day just to live. You don't have time to seek broader fulfillment. It's organized into really oppressive social structures, we think, because, okay, the difference between like pre-agricultural revolution utopia and North Sentinel Island is that this island is operating in a global context where there exist other societies with access to amenities. There exists another broader modern world. So justifying seclusion from this like shiny world of new things requires fear-mongering. It requires saying that our society is the only place in which you can live. These are the types of narratives that lead into hierarchies, strict power structures, and things that we think generally construct a rather oppressive world in which people don't have much freedom to move outside of their assigned social roles. So women perhaps raise their children, men perhaps do a lot of like crop rearing and hunting, and these things are actually bad because people don't have the freedom to decide what they want to do with their lives. The lie that exists in the status quo, this lie that you can work to better things for yourself, this alleged lie that you can work to make your life better, we think is not a lie for most people, right? Like it actually is the case that whatever conditions you are born into, you probably do have some ability to change those conditions to work towards something better. But it's not even important whether that's empirically true, right? Because even if it is a lie, the belief that you can change the day-to-day conditions of your life, having that hope is essential to persevering, is essential to like wanting to live, right? The powerful belief that your life can change is how you push through hard things. So I think this comes down pretty simply. Either you have a pretty hard life on our side, right? You don't necessarily have access to the forms of institutional privilege that might lead you to be really, really comfortable and really, really rich. But you believe that you can change the outcomes of your life, so you likely do to some extent, and even if you don't, you spend your life hoping that things will change, which is a really, really good thing because it drives you to wake up every morning. Or you do have more access to these better things, and you actually are able to achieve a place of relative comfort and stability. That's really, really nice too, for like more obvious reasons. But the bottom line here is you need to believe that you are able to dictate the outcomes of your future to want to have that future at all. It is really, really depressing to wake up every morning, like work, do this sort of manual labor, and know that nothing can ever change. Believe that that reality is not for you. Yeah, what's up?
Small societies tend to have much flatter hierarchies because there's just fewer people to fill those spots. So even someone who's doing hard work in a farm isn't upset by that because there is no other great CEO of this farm company they want to aspire to, and which makes them feel bad about their work.
I don't think that the reason why, like, physical labor that takes up every single second of your day so that you can survive is something that people would feel negatively about, is because they would compare themselves to other people and be like, oh, I'm failing. I actually don't think that the reason why most people are sad right now is necessarily about comparison so much as it is about the fact that your actual living standards, your actual day-to-day life is, like, empirically unpleasant. But you say, we are going to give this unpleasant life to everyone, and just because there's no one to look at who's having a good time means that everyone will suddenly be fine with it and be very happy. I don't think they will. They just won't have any sort of concept that there's something better to hope for. Overall, human existence is pointless without the concept of freedom and the concept of self-determination. The evils of capitalism are far preferable to the evils of oppressive isolation. And if we get a longer life that we feel better about, regardless of how it actually turns out, because we believe that we can control the trajectory of it, that is something that we are far, far, far more likely to prefer. Happy to oppose.
Okay, thanks, Speaker. Invite the Deputy Prime Minister.
Promise I'm not biased.
I mean, mine's
even
always
though I
up.
have this.
It won't last 1 year.
What's right? I'm sure it's
Left hand,
possible.
the screen goes back.
You are not free under capitalism. That is the lie of opening opposition in this debate. They say there is no happiness without freedom. But in a capitalist society, you are not free to make choices for yourself. First, you are constrained by wage slavery. You cannot quit your job because quitting your job is threatening your sustenance and your food security. You cannot quit staying on the consumerist chain because everyone around you tells you this is the way to access meaning in life. But second, every decision of yourself from before is controlled. In an extreme case, if you're born in India, where, by the way, 1.4 billion people live, your life outcomes are heavily determinative of your caste. If you're Brahmin, for example, it's quite likely that your grandfather was educated. My grandfather went to Cambridge because I have this caste privilege that the vast majority of people do not have access to. That means you do not have a culture of education in your family. So even if the caste system, de jure, does not exist anymore, de facto, it is determinative of your life. But everywhere else, caste is determinative of your life in a more subtle way because it determines what school you go to, whether you're able to access a job, and what your life's dreams and aspirations are. Opening opposition says you have hope, but false hope throws you into despair when you cannot achieve the happiness opening opposition wants you to. There are 3 paths to victory for opening government in this debate. First, you lead a better life. Second, even if you lead a good life on their side, this life is not sustainable. And third, even if materially your life is similar, you are happy on our side. Firstly, you lead a better life. I want to first observe that even if the average person does not live under extreme poverty, most people are risk averse. Risk aversion matters because behind the veil of ignorance, you imagine the possibility that you are born extremely poor. This is the standard Rawlsian argument that behind the veil of ignorance, you're likely to employ a mini-max strategy. That is, you're likely to try to improve the life of the worst off person because you imagine yourself in that condition, and that is crippling existential fear. But on top of that, I do not think you actually live a materially better life. They say you have access to modern medicine, you don't die of disease and can go to a hospital. Firstly, you are significantly likelier to fall sick. 1, you build less immunity. This is both immunity from infectious diseases that you're less exposed to, and immunity from basic things. Like, research consistently shows that people in Asia don't develop peanut allergies as much because they're exposed to peanuts pretty early. And this is really important because it means you're less likely to fall sick. But second, you're less likely to fall sick because you have guaranteed access to food. 1 day without food substantially worsens your immune system as a child in a manner that is persistent throughout your entire life. Additionally, I don't actually think you have access to healthcare. Healthcare systems are incredibly expensive to maintain. In particular, they suffer from things like adverse selection and asymmetric information, where when you go to a doctor, you don't know if the cure they are providing you is actually good or meaningful, so you can't pick a good doctor. Combined with massive resources it takes to maintain a hospital, to maintain a healthcare system, that most functioning governments are not able to guarantee you. However, food security is just more important than healthcare, because being admitted to a hospital is often not enough when you do not have access to nutrition. Why is your food security under threat even if you're not risk averse? Even if you're the average person, first, the average person earns under $10 a day, which means there's a substantial risk of slide. One day you fall sick, you get fired from your job, you cannot buy food anymore. But second, you lack substantial savings. Why? Most people live paycheck to paycheck, and people engage in hyperbolic time discounting, where they prioritize things that happen immediately to them, as opposed to things that might happen to them in the future. And this is really damaging, because it means you don't save for the future, and then when the future comes and you can't work anymore, you are left without food. On top of which, the capitalist system sets itself up such that you are dependent on it. In other words, employers are leeches that try to extract as much work and capital out of you. This means they cannot allow you to be self-sustenant and happy, because you might quit the job. So capitalism does not just alienate you from yourself, it makes you dependent on them. And to be dependent on them, that means you need to be at constant risk of sliding back, so you keep coming back to the leeches that extract labor out of you. What is the implication of this? It means you might become food insecure. You might get malnutrition. And even if this experience doesn't immediately happen to you, you stay up at night worrying about whether you can pay the bills. And this existential dread does not take the form of hope. It takes the form of fear. Capitalism doesn't want to motivate you for hope. Because if you hope for aspirations and you don't get them, you might just give up on capitalism. It motivates you through fear. It is fear that advertisers throw down your throat. It is fear that employers give you every time you try to walk out and try to quit a job. In short, we make your life happier by giving you access to food, a basic biological urge that also allows you to do things like spend your life in your community rather than rely exclusively on back-breaking work. There's also a self-perpetuating cycle, where if you're struggling to get food, you fall sick more often, are unproductive, become poorer, and can get food even less. Closing.
Why are hunter-gatherer societies polyamorous?
I have no fucking idea, man. Second, even if your life is materially good, it won't stay that way. By the way, hunter-gatherer societies were abolished due to agricultural collectivization that emerged out of literally absolute craziness in order to maximize crop production at the cost of massive food insecurity that plagued people for generations. We are happy to take the anarcho-primitivist stance on opening government. No, thank you. Even if your life is materially good, it will not stay that way. The world is changing, and the fact of non-engagement with climate change dooms their side of the house in this debate. Climate change is not existential. I'm not crazy. I'm not going to claim that. But climate change was going to damage people's lives in material ways and makes a substantial risk you die of a natural disaster. First, there's difficulty of reducing emissions. Developing countries do 63% of the world's emissions but are just beginning the industrial transition, don't want to go away, are dependent on coal. There's a collective action problem where countries don't want to sacrifice doing things like cutting emissions that benefits other countries because they know other countries are racing against them in the competitive market. There's also a risk of positive feedback loops. Every bit of climate change means more methane clathrate gets melted out of the permafrost and releases into the atmosphere, meaning even if we stop emissions now, the world is going to get hotter and hotter because it gets warmer, you burn more permafrost, you release more methane into the atmosphere that makes the world even warmer. That means there is a massive, massive risk of you dying in a natural disaster, of a natural disaster coming for you, for your community, for your job, and making your life unlivable. But finally, you're not happy. They say you can't move us outside your assigned social role, so there is no freedom. We agree. Freedom is suffering. One, you're overwhelmed with choice. You can't make good choices. There's substantial scope for regret when you know you had freedom to make a better choice. Second, hyperbolic time discounting means you make bad choices and are more likely to regret them. But third, when you don't get access to choice, you are more upset. Freedom is not a facet of human nature. Hatred of difficult work is not a facet of human nature. Those are assertions from opening opposition. People anchor their happiness based on what they are told should make them happy and based on what seems to make others around them happy. When capitalism tells you what should make you happy is getting rich, but people do not get rich, that is when they are angry. That is when they are upset. They say, why can't you choose Buddhism? But you can't. Your religion, your faith is often given to you at the point where you are born. Your expectations and what might make you happy in your life is not chosen by you, it just cannot be achieved by you. Propose.
Thank the speaker for that speech and rise it together.
We are going to be more daring inside opening government. We are not going to settle for the baseline, and we're going to tell you why the average person probably can live a good life, and we're willing to take the risk on why. The first thing I want to talk about is the baseline they give us about a stable life and what it means. They say, having food, no climate change, these are the basic things that all of you really need in life. Let's really intuition check this panel. Here's the problem. Life on their side is not an a priori good. It is not to be a good thing to be alive just because I'm a sack of meat and bones that is living and breathing. There are things that give life meaning, things like the social connections you form with people, things like the epistemic access you gain to things that you enjoy in life, looking at a pretty flower one day, having an experience that you wouldn't have otherwise. We think these are specific things you're likely to lose out on structurally on their side of the house, and we'll explain why it's the case that actually happens. But even if life isn't a priori good, we think they criminally undercover the points on things like healthcare, for example, and things like technology, for example. The average length and quality of your life in our world just needs and will be better on balance. I don't even think there's time to waste analyzing this. I think it's a concession that GovBench needs to make if it's the case that they cut themselves off from things like technology that extends your life. Cut themselves off from things like better social conveniences that allow you to live longer and live a happier life. Cut themselves off from things like entertainment or the development of certain types of culture that make you happier in the moments that you do live on our side of the house. I'll take their point early.
Freedom to access basic happiness, like stopping to smell the flowers, exists more on our side.
Right,
Because
I'll
the
get to
system
why
is
that-
less
I'll get to why
hierarchical
that-
because there are fewer people
Right.
to control
I'll get-
this
I'll-
hierarchy.
I'll
You're
get
more
to-
dependent
okay,
on each
okay.
individual person.
I'll get to this in a second. Two things in the speech. First, in the general case, actually characterizing what the word looks like. Second, in the worst case, because I don't think they realize if they want to pull up the Rawlsian thing, they have to talk about their own worst case as well, which is not just symmetric. It's probably quite bad. First, then, on the general case, the human being has a wide variety of needs and wants. Things like physical needs and wants, sure, but also their social needs and wants, their mental needs and wants. Government only meets the mere basics of these things. The push we will give you is one, you are likely to be holistically happier based on the structural ways in which you live, but secondly, you have a greater capacity to change the situation, or at least, and this is crucial, change how you think about your situation, because that's what they don't get on their side of the house. I want to note, you do not need to be at the top to be happy. I don't need to prove you need to be a CEO. I need to prove that you can maybe make a wage, or at least get some kind of mobility in your life. But secondly, they just points out that you can't quit you can't quit capitalism or something, that backbreaking work is at worst counterfactual. That's their only counterfactual. The best person in their life, by their own analysis, still goes by backbreaking work day by day. You cannot quit being a subsistence farmer, or else you starve. So if the problem is you cannot get out of the situation, it's probably far worse on their side because they structurally cannot stop doing the thing that they do to keep themselves alive. Closing.
If you're struggling, but the community is still surviving, doesn't that mean the community helps you when you are struggling?
I mean, sure, it's far more likely that the community all struggles together and all achieves like basic, meaningful well-being, because that's what happens when you don't have access to trade or have access to safety nets. If there's a bad winter, everyone gets fucked, which is the problem with their specific side of the house, and the worst case I'll get into a little later. But on general, you probably don't have enough to eat beyond just food security. You probably just are constantly struggling to make the bare minimum and eke it out to survive in the first place. On the general case, why do we think you can seek out some level of happiness on our side, even if we concede most of the structural things? I think OG does over-exaggerate this somewhat. I think there are ways to move up upward mobility at the point at which you just try new things or try to get into different fields, or at least try to do things to make yourself happier. But beyond that, there are multiple sources of meaning and happiness you can have in your life. So it's not just material wealth that makes you happy. Things like a family, a job, a pet, a place you live, things you can see and things you can do, ways you can think about your life that you only get access to when you have access to the wide world of different ideas and narratives that doesn't exist in a 50-person village on their side of the house. What do we think happens there then? We think that every person is different and has the ability to seek out meaning in different ways. And the unique reason you can do this is because of self-selection. Because you naturally have an internal drive to build into the things that make you happier rather than sadder. So even if you are poor and we concede you cannot get a job somehow and not move out of that thing, I think the average poor person then is likely to find some other way to find meaning in their life, or at least try to do so, and are far more likely to do so on their side of the house. Which means that when you get incremental benefits in the types of ways that you live, this at least gives you some kind of epistemic access to being happy on our side of the house, because there are various ways in which you can do so. It is not just, I can't make money and so my life is shit. But secondly, I think that there are competing narratives that you can access that allow you to at least find some form of meaning in other ways. Because there's a ton of answers that people go to every day when capitalism wears them down. Things like other ways to think about the world. Things like, taking time for themselves. Things like other kinds of social narratives that they use and they opt into. The reason these narratives exist is because there's the incentive for those at the bottom, or at least those in society, who seek answers to these types of questions to propagate them amongst themselves. There's a form of community that forms around the average worker who says, my life is kind of shit, but at least I can have friends and people around me to talk about that shit and maybe move past it in a certain way. I am not convinced it is all doom and gloom on our side of the house, especially when you consider the counterfactual on their side. Because what are they actually locked into on their side of the house? First, barely getting by and the minimum baseline is your best case. So for them to win this round, they must prove it is impossible for the average person to experience some modicum of happiness beyond what it takes to be alive, or otherwise they don't win the way off in the general case. But secondly, fear of the outside, which is often pushed on you, which is the mechanism Ollie explains. Because sure, there is a fear of like capitalism or fear of like being outcompeted or whatever. On their side, there's the epistemic fear of the outside world, which is constantly pushed on you by your village elders, which is how they enforce seclusion in the first place by their own mechanisms. So I don't know how it is you can be happy or be like content with yourself when you are continually convinced that the world is out to get you, that there's a huge amount of anger or upsetment against you. This is how the society on their side controls you and convinces you not to venture past the picket fence. No more points, please. Not to venture past the picket fence and seek the outside world. There's a huge amount of epistemic uncertainty there as well. But thirdly, a lack of diversity or the lack of experiences you gain. You can just do less things in life on their side of the house. You are a subsistence farmer and you're locked into that role. Maybe you don't like being a subsistence farmer. Well, fuck it, bad for you, because there's no other option that they just has given out to you that you can actually engage in. At least on our side, you have the semblance of control and the semblance of autonomy, and we think there's a unique moral worth in doing so for yourself, because you can at least convince yourself that your life is getting better, or convince yourself you're doing everything you can. Finally then, on the worst case, because for the valid ignorance thing, I think they have to accept, they have to also weigh on their worst case. On the percentage of possibility of the worst cases. On our side, sure, there are some terrible places you might be born into. We think that first, there often exists, if not always, some mechanism to work up the ladder, even if it's not likely. It's better than being locked in epistemically like you are on their side. But secondly, there are ways to reconceptualize this like I've just told you. So even if you're in the worst places, I don't believe that the average person just feels no happiness or meaning in their life and would rather not be alive. I reject that with my whole being. But secondly, I think that on their side, the island is so small and isolated, I don't know how they get to caveat it's just going to be a utopia. I think the moment it's the case that someone gains some kind of social power or some kind of social hierarchy in society, which often will happen if someone, I don't know, makes more food one day than someone else makes food, there's the incentive for these kind of structures to build up in the first place. Crucially, you don't have epistemic access to whether that's true or not, so you weigh against the probability that their side might be kind of fucked up. But secondly, even if it's perfectly equal, I don't know what place you are in that society, because I posit there are still people who are on the bottom rungs of society who aren't liked by everyone. There are still people who are on the bottom rungs of society and get the hardest jobs or the most labor. So I don't know why it's the case on their side that you somehow have equal and magic utopia that you can be in. The one difference that we give you, and the reason we win, on our side you can leave. On our side you can try something new. On our side you can have hope for a better day tomorrow. On their side you're stuck in the monotony of the masses, and that's terrible. Proud to propose.
I find the speaker for that seat. I invite the member of government.
The happiest people I have ever seen are not those who are living the richest lives. It is those who had a sense of purpose, it is those who followed a certain code of conduct, and it is those who necessarily knew what they wanted in life. Many of these people are religious, for example, and still find massive meaning in their life and know what they want on our side of the house. That is what provides value to life, and that is what provides meaning. Because the comparative in opposition is that when you live life for no good reason, you consistently doubt yourself, and you consistently think of what could have been, what our choice I could have made, or when you consistently feel like, I made the choices I did, I have the calling I want. I think that is what matters on our side of the house. The first thing I want to explain then in this extension is extremely simple. Why is it the case that you're consistently questioning the very basis of your identity, why it is challenged every day in modern society, and why you're likely to not be able to build a strong sense of identity on side or possession? There are three things I want to note here. Firstly, society is often likely to challenge identity, and there is massive amount of conflict both within your own individual identity group and externally. There are two specific things I want to note. One, this is an everyday thing that exists on their side of the house. Often it is things like social media, where you often see different differing views from your own. It is things like not knowing what I should believe in. It is actively being challenged in your views on a day-to-day basis, probably religiously, probably in the way that you necessarily have educational experiences that are massively different than on their side has. Secondly, it is social media that actively tells you other types of narratives. Narratives that you don't necessarily want to believe in. Narratives that are the other and that you don't necessarily want to compromise on their side of the house. Thirdly though, and this is super important, notice that on their side of the house, this identity challenge also exists in political spectrums in other places. So what this looks like is, for example, minorities often having their identity vain on side or position. It is things that tell you that your identity is invalid, that you should often conform to modern societal trends. So what this looks like is conservative people, often when they go to the city, being told your identity wasn't valid in the first place. Secondly, it's just hard to choose your identity. And this is very, very simple, right? I think when you're exposed to a multitude of different views, when you're exposed to a multitude of different possibilities, it's just very difficult to pick what you necessarily want. There are two implications of this. One, it's just hard to know what defines me. What is my purpose in life? There are so many things around you that you could possibly pick from, but on their side of the house, it is just massively difficult to know this. But secondly, I think individualism and independence is a massive thing that is promoted in status quo. That's because there are many incentives to do so. The fact that you often want to make money, the fact that materialism means that you ought work 18 hours a day to make the money in the first place, often means you are told you ought find this meaning yourself, that it has to be unique and personal. So what this means is the society often puts the narrative on you and says, hey, your identity, it is something that you ought find your own meaning, but that meaning is extremely difficult to find because not only do you not have the time to do so, it is often a vague, nebulous thing you cannot think compare to. Why does this mean that you are always unhappy? Two things. One, we think meaning is fundamentally what gives you a drive to live, right? It tells you what matters. It tells you why you want to engage in certain things when you compare it. But secondly, without this meaning, life really doesn't exist as a valuable choice, right? I think on their side, it's very unclear where you're going to get the kind of meaning to talk about. Why is it then on the comparative that you are likely to find significantly more meaning and not have your identity invalidated on a daily basis? But before that, opening.
So sure, meaning is hard to find. It's not impossible, we tell you why. The problem on your side, by your own openings characterization, you cannot select an identity for yourself. You're a farmer and you're going to
Okay, yeah, I'll explain why that. That is OG's problem. That's exactly where I'm going to fit in. I think OG does that. We're not going to do that. That's the exact thing. There are three specific things on why we are likely to do this. One, social indoctrination. It works really fucking well from status quo. What does this look like? When I was raised a Muslim for 18 years, I believed it very fundamentally until I showed up to the United States. If my identity wasn't challenged, I would have been a great believer and not be terrified of death right now. I would posit that this means that the indoctrination is often very effective on this island at the point where your viewpoint necessarily isn't challenged. That means that you're consistently happy. Consistently think everyone around believes in the same God. We're not going to die and go to hell. My friend isn't going to go and be damned for the entirety of eternity and massive mental pressure that exists within their world. Secondly, your parents and everyone around you believes the same things. When you are about to die, when you think you are sick, everything that is given to you is a word of reassurance, not an attempt to convert you, not an attempt to change your identity and your beliefs, but rather a validation of the choices that you necessarily made. It is meaning that is fundamental to you that is given on our side of the house. Thirdly, everyone validates you. They tell you what you did was okay. The simplicity of everything around you is much more important because there's this communal values that often come together so you can believe that you've made the right choices all along. When the entirety of the community believes in the exact same thing, we think that is what means that you're likely to be happy. You don't consistently question and doubt yourself. Finally, obviously your roles are significantly more defined and easy to find. So what this means is that on our side of the house, there's a clear straight path in life. Like go find someone to marry, for example, maybe, I don't know. Go and have X, Y, and Z things, and this is the definition of a meaningful life. If this is what is taught to you from childhood, then it's a much easier meaning to access than the comparative that exists on all, where there are 30,000 different meanings on their side. That means that just on a question of meaning, on the ability to find a life that is worth living, on the ability to choose that I want to live this particular life, I think we are significantly ahead of the path. But before that, please.
You're assuming a well-meaning and coherent religion, dear. It's going to be a folk religion because you have no conception of cause and effect, and you're obsessing about the moon.
Yeah. It doesn't matter if it's a folk religion if everyone believes in it. That's what I'm trying to say, right? Like, if everyone says we all believe in the same folk religion, we're going to go do all our deity stuff. Like, I think Islam, Christianity, everything was a folk religion once, guys, and people believed in it and died for it. I don't think that's the comparative that it says. Secondly then, why is life on their side of the house bad? Just structurally making sure that opening opposition cannot say, guys, we're going to get a really good healthcare and other kinds of things. There are two specific reasons why even in the future, if technology advances, whatever happens, life is always going to be terrible. One, overpopulation. Just the fact that you have had significant numbers of people born, the fact that you're always going to have a limited number of resources means that there's an exponential birth rate, which means on a comparative, at the point where resources are diminishing in status quo, it is often very difficult to find new things. But secondly, cities specifically are overpopulated and overcrowded, and these are the main sectors for jobs. Notice what this means. This often means that if they want any good jobs, when you move to a city, the cost of living increases, rent increases, etc. And so you can never opt out. But secondly, and super important, every time I engage in work on this side of the house, note that I have to continue engaging in trying to find the next promotion. The reason for this is that everyone else around me is always going to work to their maximal extent. Note that this isn't an individual pressure. It is a communal pressure where even if I didn't want to opt in because my coworker is going to be aiming for that promotion, it is impossible for me to opt out. That means that on their side of the house, sure, we might do back-breaking labor sometimes, but they have the consistent mental stress of having to go back to the office the next day. They never have the satisfaction of knowing I did a good day's work, and maybe it was enough. They always think it wasn't, so work is symmetric, the mental pressure isn't. Very proud to propose.
Thank the speaker and invite the member of all.
I'm far away anyway.
Far away.
It's even.
I think the suggestion coming from government that hunter-gatherers did not have desires, that they had profound meanings to their lives and were perfectly content is a lie. I want to first flip the entirety of OG, what our opening did not do, and prove to you why desires still largely exist and why those desires are in fact more able to be maximized on our side of the house, even if there are some competitive forces that inflict some perspective onto our preferences and how they form. I think there are largely 4 reasons why desires still exist. Number 1, we are biologically engineered to have sexual desires to compete with different mates in the pursuit of some partner to begin with. So that is to suggest we are competitive at our core. We are likely, even if we live in this society, to be comparing ourselves to others, trying to find the ideal partner. And namely, this process is likely to be violent, if anything. That is to say, in a society that is completely isolated, without any solvency that the natural world provides us to create discussion forums and have some semblance of civilization, I would posit these methods are likely to be far worse and harmful in the way they pit people against each other. Second, people derive meaning from the pursuit of self-affirmation. The reason why most people debate is because they think, I'm good at it, and it's going to make me happy when I give a great speech, and I do really well. That's also why I think most debaters are delusioned into thinking they're really good, when not all of them necessarily are. What this means, then, is that these sort of functions increase dopamine to our brains. It is something we inherently crave. So, when I enter a hunter-gatherer society, I derive pleasure from the fact that I think I am better than this other individual. I derive pleasure when I kill more deer, and that inherently is competitive and a hedonic treadmill in and of itself. What we needed was an explanation as to why capitalism is so much worse. I would posit these still exist. They probably are just a lot more brutalist and violent in nature. Third, I would posit that status chasing is entrenched and enforced by those with power. And look, power structures also still exist on these levels. Why is this the case? When I'm a successful hunter-gatherer and I get a small promotion in the status of my village, I feel great. I I crave that promotion because I exert influence over those people. So that is to suggest, without any other competing forces, that small marginal change in power is only amplified. I want to keep onto it. I want to aggregate it. And in a world absent of any meaningful way to contest these power structures, I honestly struggle with government. What happens when this village inevitably develops these entrenched structures with someone at the top who defines your beliefs that you ought to believe in and inflicts violence onto you when no one can come save you? And I think the lack of this means that there is no checks and balances in the way that power is distributed. The last reason I think desire still broadly exists is that there is a revealed preference of individuals, even those with the most amount of means, to not aggregate in a single profession. So that is to suggest not everyone who's extremely wealthy chooses to go to craftsmanship as their primary occupation, but rather diversifies, which suggests that we are not all monolithic in the way that gives us pleasure. We care about different things. We care about pursuing different careers. Why is this important? Desires are good because they invite people to indulge in other worlds. And as much as everyone shits on capitalism, I think that there are many more avenues for people to access such pleasure. Even in my worst case, if I'm working in a factory, I still have some degree of autonomy to be able to walk the streets of Mumbai and appreciate the scenery and landscape around me. And maybe this is difficult for OG to imagine as to why people get pleasure from things beyond sniffing flowers, but I would posit that this is meaningful to some people, and we ought not from childbirth dictate this single monolithic path that derives this pleasure, and we're inherently choice maximizing in this regard. I want to now explain why you have more mobility in the context of communities, and this is going to be our second contribution. Let's do a little bit of thinking. I think most people in this world have a problem, whether it be mental, whether it be physical, whether it be some ailment. If I lived in a hunter-gatherer society, I would be blind and I could not see. That is to suggest that most people, even if they're born in these societies, have something that will make them an outsider, an other individual. If you have a blindness problem, for example, that society has no way to cure you or meaningfully heal you. If you have schizophrenia, people in that society are likely to think you are insane because there is no meaningful scientific explanation. So what is to suggest for the people who deviate from the norm, which I would posit is most people in some meaningful way, they're ostracized. They think they're going insane when science cannot explain to them what is biologically going on for them. So if we want to talk about providing meaning, I would posit that these people are probably a lot more important than, oh, people now feeling happy because they have food, because at least society is validating their experiences. And this is the remarkable facet of the world, in as much as it is validating that yes, you can feel this way and it is okay, whereas insular societies would ostracize you and tell you something is wrong. Closing. Opening.
Humans evolved to feel competitive pressure, but not to never feel happy with what they have, and you concede lots of hunter-gatherers feel happy at the prospect of success. Capitalism tries to tell you to never feel satisfied and always reach for a top that is unattainable.
Bro, this is your interpretation of capitalism. I honestly think, I think most people, it is not in your best interest to subscribe in absolute to the hedonic treadmill and derive all of your pleasure and attach it to material wealth. If that was the case, most people would honestly want to kill themselves because most people are average blue-collar workers who do not have things great. So I think the most charitable and realistic interpretation of capitalism is that yes, some people derive pleasure from climbing the treadmill, but people do not assign their absolute value to that, absolute worth to that. They assign it to the experiences, the relationships they have, and on net, we broaden the amount of choice you're able to have. Closing.
Yeah, so the ability to make relationships is also dependent on capitalism because you're competing with other people who are also within the
Okay, let me explain this. You compete with people within the society as well. Why do you think your lack of understanding is agonizing and choice limiting in terms of the amount of knowledge you acquire? Thousands of years ago, every experience was a source of anguish for people. You saw meteors shooting through the sky and you thought the world was going to end. You felt an earthquake and you thought this was a sign from God that your life was going to end. Crucially, the way that information disseminates in the societies is going to proliferate pain and not actually build knowledge. This is for two reasons. One, your reduction of the outside world makes it difficult to provide long-lasting explanations that stand the test of time. That's to say, it is difficult for you to explain to a woman why she's having her period, why it is so painful to engage in childbirth, and how that works. And when people question those experiences, you have have no ability to grant them a meaningful solution. But second, your ability to document these moments is also limited, which is to suggest that not understanding cause and effect is a source of anguish. Society has a revealed preference for the pursuit of knowledge. There's a reason why people opt to pursue sciences and answer questions about the world. So when people are deprived of this choice, it makes them go insane. It makes them question why they're on this planet, and if this life is worth living. I would posit that this lack of meaning is far worse than anything you heard from the government.
I thank the speaker for that speech. I invite the government.
Ours was 1 minute speeches.
Sorry? 1 minute speeches, you get 1 minute speeches, you
So I'm gonna give a 1 minute speech, 85 gems.
Yeah.
I'm actually solely tempted. It's actually kind of sad.
Okay, one goes to whoever gives the shortest speech.
Cool, we go. COOO then OG. First CO. Firstly, it is easier to get checks and balances on our side and control the hierarchy as compared to an opposition. The reason for this is because the community groups themselves are smaller. You can always interact with the closest village chieftain who's often close to you in your own community or in the next village. Notice what happens in opposition. You have big governments who have huge amounts of gerrymandering, huge amounts of monopolies in many instances. Many instances you actually live in motherfucking dictatorships. So I don't understand where all this choice is coming from in many instances. You have very minimal competition as well. Because apart from the fact that it could be gerrymandered, rich people can always lobby far better than the vast majority of middle class and poor people can. But thirdly, you often feel you have far less control anyways because you don't preemptively try and reach out. Because newspaper organizations constantly have incentives to provide bad information or negative or like sad information to you about how bad the world is. So you don't do this anyways. Secondly, on how hunter-gatherers have a lot of desires. 3 responses often still have desires. First of all, desires are decided by what you think you could desire. If you cannot imagine certain things that you don't currently experience in the life close to you, it's not clever, you have to desires. But secondly, if they want to make this claim about sexual desires, you surely can have that a lot better on our side because you want your tribe to increase. But in opposition, if you're born into one of three of the biggest religions, I don't know why you don't get shamed for that sexual desire anyways. The next claim is people are brutal. Why? I don't know. Because there are no threats that prevent you or want you to be violent, right? You already control the entire island. You don't have any animals trying to fight out against you. You obviously don't want to kill any person next to you because I don't know why you hate your family or your child. You surely have biological instincts to love. But next, even if you have desires, you are never happy with fulfilling the first desire anyways, precisely because as opening government themselves said, you are often trying to constantly chase the next desire. So at least on our side of the house, there is one desire you are unable to fulfill. On their side of the house, you may feel slightly happy and then feel even sadder as compared to before because you realize that you're not able to achieve it anyways. The next thing is you can smell the streets of Mumbai. Okay, great guys. It's fucking small. It's a shit ton of dirt. You see a fuck ton of homeless people everywhere you go in all of these motherfucking communities. I don't know why the fuck you feel happy every time you most try and meet them in many instances. The next thing is you have mobility in many of these communities. No, it is a lot easier to have mobility and face this discrimination on our community because you only have to convince 10 people to try and ensure that your affliction or your disease is okay or your minority confliction is okay. On their side of the house, you can still face that same confliction, i.e. you being of a different race or being of a different gender, but there's no ability to gain a lot of traction for it because it's not certain you are living next to members of your own, like you are living next to people in the specific city who's also happy like you. But secondly, I just feel you can find commonalities on your side of the house as well. Unless closing opposition wants to make the ahistorical claim that these people do not love each other and are evil to each other, they are losing. Next, are you able to succeed? And this responds to opening opposition as well. First of all, not everybody on our life is going to live the same kind of life by CO's definition, right? So you still can aspire to slightly better things like becoming the village chieftain without having Instagram constantly try and market it to you about how you're able to live a bad life. But secondly, and this is what flips opening opposition, you cannot meet your basic needs without being competitive because you often live in a high cost of living city, a city where often there are too few houses, which means you often are paying increasingly higher amounts of rents, where you constantly have to aspire to promotion or you will get fired by a boss because they can always always fire you and hire the next person who is seen as more ambitious. And since most systems are not ones of social welfare anyways, this beats closing opposition as well, because you cannot be happy as you are going to lose your job anytime. You're not going to meet your basic needs because your basic needs are always higher when you're living in a high cost of living city. This obviously also weighs about opening government, because even if you're a middle class individual, which by their own analysis presumably like of several billion people are not, you are not able to escape the possibility that you cannot meet those basic needs, and that makes you horrifying. Next they say, but you can always logically question cause and effect. I'm sorry, not everybody is as logical as closing opposition, even though I don't think they really are. One, religion is often able to have answers to this in the vast majority of instances anyways. They're still able to find explanations of this. No. Secondly, you are not very logical. By OO's own analysis, you are somebody who isn't very smart, who isn't going to high levels of education in many instances. So you're not looking for questions in the first instance. But thirdly, just because you understand cause and effect doesn't make you any happier. You can always feel sad because science may still not have all the answers. So you may have some answers, but you keep asking more questions as a result of those answers as well. So this often means you're going to be fine. Like, I just do not think that our parents and grandparents, who probably had far fewer answers to many of the problems in their life, live meaningfully sadder lives as compared to ours. If they want to, it would just be going against us. Next, against opening opposition. Firstly, on fear mongering, you do not have the freedom to decide where you want to go and where you want to go, right? So often you do not have incentives to want to leave your life because your loved ones are here and all these sorts of things. And I do not think OO ever explains why autonomy is inherent in the human condition beyond a random one-liner that just asserts it. Secondly, are you able to leave? No, you cannot leave under capitalism anyways, because often it's too expensive to move to the neighboring village. It's too expensive to have the cost. But there is the illusion you can. So you know what you do? You feel a lot more terrible on side opposition because of the system you're living under, which flips them. But finally, on dying, I don't understand why dying is bad in many instances. My grandparents died at much younger ages than I do, but I don't think they ever felt much sadder at all, because they're often focused on the fact that everyone else around them was often living sadder lives, often dying at around roughly the same age, and so you still feel you can live a pleasurable life anyways, right? They say like, but there are many new experiences you couldn't experience. So what? Probably like a game like tennis could be really wonderful or fascinating for me, even though I don't play it. That doesn't mean I live a meaningfully sadder life just because any and every possible new opportunity I don't expect. But also I think it just taught a lot more coping mechanisms on this. Before I wave of opening government, CEO.
Mumbai sounds great. God's characterization is uncharitable, as all of your analysis is a bunch of explanation as to why capitalism means everyone is constantly competitive, but somehow magically in society, no one cares about climbing on top of each other. Just so uncharitable.
Nobody cares about, no, but you do care about climbing on top of each other on their side of the house. On our side, as you have one position to try and climb yourself on top over, maybe the village chieftain or something like that. On their side, it's many more constant positions, because there's always the next promotion. A job always hates you.
Your own member tells me why autonomy matters because it's important to pick your own meaning. We tell you and CEO reasserts why you can pick that meaning. On your side, you're reformer.
Yes. No. You can pick a meaning, and the meaning will constantly change when you're constantly finding an attack on that meaning from social media that exposes you to a different form of identity. When you constantly are attacked from that, from a new religion, from visiting the United States where you previously were a member of your own community, there is constantly attacks on your own identity, which means your meaning is constantly changing. But secondly, the fact that your meaning is constantly changing is because the way the attack comes from is from news organizations or from people on social media who often talk about it in the most horrific ways possible, right? Who could harass you about this, who could often make you feel a lot worse about this. Why is self-doubt worse than anything opening opposition says? Firstly, self-doubt is the most constant thing you feel. Most people don't always spend time with friends or family, right? They often live with yourself and see yourself in the mirror, and nobody else can comfort you about this because nobody truly knows you as compared to anyone else. But secondly, versus things like, food insecurity and that sort of stuff. One, food insecurity obviously isn't constant and is not true for everybody above the very poorest. But secondly, you are often able to feel a lot worse anyways. Our argument affects rich and poor people alike over people who make 100K, because you can always be facing attacks on your own identity. This is what is much more important than physical labor, right? Physical labor can exist some of the time, but mental labor exists all the time. When you sleep, when you're hanging out with your friends and family. For all those reasons, I'm very happy to propose.
I thank the speaker. Call upon the offer.
CJ strawmans us on cause and effect. It's not a perfect understanding of cause and effect means you're perfectly happy, but it's a prerequisite to replicate the types of experiences, to make choices that make you happy, if choices and autonomies are that what matter. Because I would posit, on this island, when you get a nightmare, you think it's the gods. When you think something bad happens and get anxiety, that is because of the forest spirits. You are a miasma of superstition and folk religions. It's not like Christianity or Islam, where a textual evidence gives you ways about the world where Muhammad spread the Middle East through trade, or Christianity spread through the Roman Empire, through generations can be honed for explanations, can actually drive scientific revolutions. We say when you are trapped in the observations of your own world, the types of negative biological experiences we told you were very common, uncontested by these teams. Things like blindness, things like schizophrenia, things like mental illness that naturally affect people, the types of genetic inbreeding that exist on this island, which means you're much more likely to have genetic issues, means that as you experience the world, you are not experiencing one that you can access meaning to. All you access is superstition. The first question I'm going to ask is, dealing with OG, is what happens to desire? They act like no desire exists because your food needs are met. But we say there are a bunch of biological desires like sexual desire, like hormones,